Continuing Cleomenes from Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. Megalopolis was at that time a city of itself, as great and as powerful as Sparta, and had the forces of the Achaeans and of Antigonus encamping beside it, and was chiefly the Megalopolitans' doing, that Antigonus had been called in to assist the Achaeans, Cleomenes resolving to snatch the city. No other word so well suits so rapid and so surprising an action, ordered his men to take 5 days' provision, and marched to Cilicia, as if he intended to ravage the country of the Argives, but from thence making a descent into the territories of Megalopolis, and refreshing his army about Rhoeteum, he suddenly took the road by Hericus, and advanced directly upon the city. When he was not far off the town, he sent Pantius with 2 regiments to surprise a portion of the wall between 2 towers, which he learnt to be the most unguarded quarter of the Megalopolitans' fortifications, and with the rest of his forces he followed leisurely. Pantius not only succeeded at that point, but finding a great part of the wall without guards, he at once proceeded to pull it down in some places and make openings through it in others, and killed all the defenders that he found. Whilst he was thus busied, Cleomenes came up to him, and was got with his army within the city, before the Megalopolitans knew of the surprise, when after some time they learned their misfortune. Some left the town immediately, taking with them what property they could. Others armed and engaged the enemy, and though they were not able to beat them out, yet they gave their citizens time and opportunity safely to retire, so that there were not above 1,000 persons taken in the town, all the rest flying with their wives and children, and escaping to Messene. The greater number also of those that armed and fought the enemy were saved, and very few taken. Amongst them were Lysandridas and Theorydas, 2 men of great power and reputation amongst the Megalopolitans, and therefore the soldiers, as soon as they were taken, brought them to Cleomenes, and Lysandridas, as soon as he saw Cleomenes afar off, cried out, "Now, King of Sparta, it is in your power, by doing a most kingly and a nobler action than you have already performed, to purchase the greatest glory." And Cleomenes, guessing at his meaning, replied, "What, Lysandridas, you will not surely advise me to restore your city to you again?" "It is that which I mean," Lysandridas replied, "and I advise you not to ruin so brave a city, but to fill it with faithful and steadfast friends and allies, by restoring their country to the Megalopolitans, and bring the savior of so considerable a people." See, it's not just one leader. You have to build an infrastructure. Well, you have to set forth the people to support the good system, or the system you want anyways. Cleomenes paused a while, and then said, "It is very hard to trust so far in these matters, but with us let profit always yield to glory." Having said this, he sent the two men to Messene with a herald, or is it Messena, with a herald from himself, offering the Megalopolitans their city again, if they would forsake the Achaean interest and be on his side. But though Cleomenes made these generous and humane proposals, Philopoemen would not suffer them to break their league with the Achaeans, and accusing Cleomenes to the people, as if his design was not to restore the city, but to take citizens too, he forced Theocritus and Ascendridas to leave Messena. This was that Philopoemen, who was afterwards chief of the Achaeans and a man of greatest reputation among the Greeks, as I have related in his own life, this news coming to Cleomenes, though he had before taken strict care that the city should not be plundered, yet then, being in anger, and out of all patience, he despoiled the place of all the valuables, and sent the statues and pictures to Sparta, and demolishing a great part of the city, he marched away for fear of Antigonus and the Achaeans, but they never stirred, for they were at Agium at a council of war. There Aratus mounted the speaker's place, and went a long while holding his mantle before his face. And at last, the company being amazed, and commanding him to speak, he said, Megalopolis is destroyed by Cleomenes. The assembly instantly dissolved. The Achaeans, being astounded at the suddenness and greatness of the loss, and Antigonus, intending to send speedy succors, when he found his forces gather very slowly out of their winter quarters, sent them orders to continue there still, and he himself marched to Argos with a small body of men. And now the second enterprise of Cleomenes, though it had the look of a desperate and frantic adventure, yet in Polybius' opinion it was done with mature deliberation and great foresight, for knowing very well that the Macedonians were dispersed into their winter quarters, and that Antigonus, with his friends and a few mercenaries about him, wintered in Argos. Upon these considerations he invaded the country of the Argives, hoping to shame Antigonus to a battle upon unequal terms, or else, if he did not dare to fight, to bring him into disrepute. With the Achaeans. And thus, this accordingly happened, for Cleomenes, wasting, plundering, and spoiling the whole country, the Argives, in grief and anger at the loss, gathered in crowds at the king's gates, crying out that he should either fight or surrender his command to better and braver men. But Antigonus, as became an experienced captain, accounting it rather dishonorable, foolishly to the hazard of his army, and quit his security, than merely to be railed at. He accounted it dishonorably, I think I left a word out, accounting it rather dishonorable, foolishly, to hazard his army and quit his security, than merely be railed at by other people, would not march out against Cleomenes, but stood firm in his convictions. Cleomenes, in the meantime, brought his army up to the very walls, and having without opposition spoiled the country, and, insulted over his enemies, drew off again. Yeah, you don't just lead the army to do what you can, you know what you should with the army, and what's good for them, but, it doesn't always pan out materially according to honor. Jump a little bit there. A little while after, being informed that Antigonus designed a new advance to Tecaea and thence to invade Laconia, he rapidly took his soldiers and marching by a side road appeared early in the morning before Argos and wasted the fields about it. The corn he did not cut down, as is usual, with reaping books and knives, but beat it down with great wooden staves, made like broadswords, as if, in mere contempt and wanton scorn, while traveling on his way, without any effort or trouble, he spoiled and destroyed their harvest. Yet, when his soldiers would have set Calabaris, the exercise ground, on fire, he stopped the attempt, as if he felt that the mischief he had done at Megalopolis had been the effects of his passion rather than his wisdom. And when Antigonus first of all came hastily back to Argos, and then occupied the mountains and passes with his posts, he professed to disregard and despise it all. He sent heralds to ask for the keys of the temple of Juno, as though he proposed to offer sacrifice there and then return, and with this scornful pleasantry upon Antigonus, having sacrificed to whom they considered to be a goddess, under the walls of the temple, which was shut, he went to Phlius, and from thence, driving out those that garrisoned Oligurtus, he marched down to Cleomenes. And these enterprises not only encouraged the citizens, but made him appear to the very enemies to be a man worthy of high command and capable of great things. For with the strength of one city, not only to fight the power of the Macedonians and all the Peloponnesians, supported by all the royal treasures, not only to preserve Laconia from being spoilt, but to waste the enemy's country, and to take so many and such considerable cities, was an argument of no common skill and genius for command. And, of course, if they're worshipping under the temple, it's an entity of birth, right? But also of death, right? But he that first said that money was the sinews of affairs seems especially in that saying to refer to war. Demades, when the Athenians had voted that their galleys should be launched and equipped for action, but could produce no money, told them the baker was wanted first, and the pilot after, and the old Archidamus, in the beginning of the Peloponnesian War, when the allies demanded that the amount of their contributions should be determined, it is reported to have answered that war cannot be fed upon so much a day, for as wrestlers who have thoroughly trained and disciplined their bodies in time tire down and exhaust the most agile and most skillful combatant, so Antigonus, coming to the war with great resources to spend from, wore out Cleomenes, whose poverty made it difficult for him to provide the merest sufficiency of pay for the mercenaries, or of provisions for the citizens. For in all other respects, time favored Cleomenes, for Antigonus's affairs at home began to be disturbed, for the barbarians wasted and overran Macedonia, whilst he was absent, and that particular time a vast army of Illyrians had entered the country, to be freed from whose devastations the Macedonians sent for Antigonus, and the letters had almost been brought to him before the battle was fought, upon the receipt of which he would at once have marched away home, and left the Achaeans to look to themselves. But fortune, that loves to determine the greatest affairs by a minute, in this conjuncture showed an exact niceness of time, and immediately after the battle in Cilicia was over, and Cleomenes had lost his army and his city, the messengers came up and called for Antigonus, and this above everything made Cleomenes' misfortune to be pitied, for if he had gone on retreating, and had forborne fighting 2 days longer, there had been no need of hazarding a battle, since upon the departure of the Macedonians he might have had what conditions he pleased from the Achaeans. But now, as was said before, for want of money, being necessitated to trust everything to arms, he was forced with 20,000, such is Polybius' account, to engage 30,000, and approving himself an admiral commander in this difficulty, his citizens showing an extraordinary courage, and his mercenaries bravery enough, he was overborne by the different way of fighting, and the weight of the heavy-armed phalanx. Plutarch also confirms that the treachery of some about him was the chief cause of Cleomenes' ruin. For Antigonus gave orders that the Illyrians and the Acarnanians should march round by a secret way and encompass the other wing, which Euclides, Cleomenes' brother, commanded, and then drew out the rest of his forces to the battle. And Cleomenes, from a convenient rising, viewing his order and not seeing any of the Illyrians and Acarnanians, began to suspect that Antigonus had sent them upon some such design, and calling for Demoteles, who was at the head of those specially appointed to such ambush duty, he bade him carefully look after and discover the enemy's designs upon his rear. But Demoteles, for some say Antigonus had bribed him, telling him that he should not be solicitous about that matter, for all was well enough, but mind and fight those that met him in the front. He was satisfied, and advanced against Antigonus, and by the vigorous charge of his Spartans made the Macedonian phalanx give ground, and pressed upon them with great advantage about half a mile. But then, making a stand, and seeing the danger which the surrounding wing, commanded by his brother Euclides, was in, he cried out, "You are lost, dear brother. Thou art lost, thou brave example to our Spartan youth, and theme of our matron's songs." And Euclides' wing being cut in pieces, and the conquerors from that part falling upon him, he perceived his soldiers to be disordered and unable to maintain the fight, and therefore provided for his own safety. There fell, we are told, in the battle, besides many of the mercenary soldiers, all the Spartans, 6,000 in number, except 200. When Cleomenes came into the city, he advised those citizens that he met to receive Antigonus, and as for himself, he said, which should appear most advantageous to Sparta, whether his life or death, that he would choose, seeing the women running out to those that had fled with him, taking their arms and bringing drink to them, he entered into his own house, and his servants, who was a freeborn woman, taken from Megalopolis after his wife's death, ordering as usual to do the service he needed on returning from war. Though he was very thirsty, he refused to drink, and though very weary to sit down, but in his corselet as he was, he laid his arm sideway against a pillar, and leaning his forehead upon his elbow, which is not too comfortable, he rested. I guess he rested his body a little while, and ran over in his thoughts all the courses he could take, and then with his friends set out at once for Guthrum, where, finding ships which had been got ready for this very purpose, they embarked. Antigonus, taking the city, treating the Lacedaemonians courteously, and in no way offering any insult or offense to the dignity of Sparta, but permitting them to enjoy their own laws and polity, and sacrificing to the Damans, dislodged the third day. I think I'm not sure which term, daimon or theon or something. Dislodged the third day. He heard that there was a great war in Macedonia, and that the country was devastated by the barbarians. Now, if it's Latin, we're talking, deities, and for he heard that there was a great war in Macedonia, and that the country was devastated by the barbarians. Besides, his malady had now thoroughly settled into a consumption and continual catarrh. Yet he still kept up, and managed to return and deliver his country, and meet there a most glorious death in a great defeat and a vast slaughter of the barbarians, as Plutarch says, and is probable in itself. He broke a blood vessel by shouting in the battle itself. In the schools we used to be told that after the victory was won, he cried out for joy, "O glorious day!" and presently, bringing up a quantity of blood, fell into a fever, which never left him till his death. And thus much concerning Antigonus. Cleomenes, sailing from Cythera, touched at another island called Agia, whence, as he was about to depart for Cyrene, one of his friends, Thracian by name, a man of noble spirit in all enterprises, and bold and lofty in his talk, came privately to him and said thus, "Sir, death in battle, which is the most glorious, we have let go, though all heard us say that Antigonus should never tread over the king of Sparta unless dead. And now that course which is next in honor and virtue is presented to us, whither do we madly sail, flying the evil which is near, to seek that which is at a distance? For if it is not dishonorable for the race of Hercules to serve the successors of Philip and Alexander, we shall save a long voyage by delivering ourselves up to Antigonus, who probably is as much better than Ptolemy, as the Macedonians are better than the Egyptians. But if we think it mean to submit to those whose arms have conquered us, why should we choose him for our master, by whom we have not yet been beaten? Is it to acknowledge two superiors instead of one, whilst we run away from Antigonus and flatter Ptolemy? Or is it for your mother's sake that you retreat to Egypt? It will indeed be a very fine and very desirable sight for her to show her son to Ptolemy's woman. To show her son to Ptolemy's women, now changed from a prince into an exile and a slave. Are we not still masters of our own swords? And while we have Laconia in view, shall we not here free ourselves from this disgraced misery, and clear ourselves to those who at Salacia died for the honor and defense of Sparta? Or shall we sit lazily in Egypt, inquiring what news from Sparta, and whom Antigonus hath been pleased to make governor of Lacedaemon? What does Laca mean? Are they the light of the, of the jinn? The male and female entities, that are disincarnate. Thus spoke Therakion, and this was Cleomenes' reply: by seeking death, you coward, the most easy and ready refuge, you fancy that you shall appear courageous and brave, though this flight is baser than the former. Better men than we have given way to their enemies, having been betrayed by fortune, are oppressed by multitude. But he that gives way under labor or distresses, under the ill opinions or reports of men, yields the victory to his own effeminacy. For a voluntary death ought not to be chosen as a relief from action, but as an exemplary action itself. And it is base either to live or to die only to ourselves. That death, to which you now invite us, is proposed only as a release from our present miseries, but carries nothing of nobleness or profit in it. And I think it becomes both me and you not to despair of our country, but when there are no hopes of that left, those that have an inclination may quickly die. To this Therakion returned no answer, but as soon as he had an opportunity of leaving Cleomenes' company, went aside on the seashore and ran himself through. Okay, I was wondering when someone was going to kill themselves in this story. It was like, why is that? I mean, it's horrible, but it's kind of, how some things are. It's like, oh, that's bad, but it's shocking, kind of, that's where the laugh comes from. But if you're soldiers of one army, soldiers of another army, you're not really exhibiting any different principles. What does it matter what your ruler is, right? And that you can't be a soldier your whole life. It's like, yeah. But Cleomenes sailed from Agia, landed in Libaa, and, being honorably conducted through the king's country, came to Alexandria. When he was first brought to Ptolemy, no more than common civilities and usual attentions were paid him, but when upon trial he found him a man of deep sense and great reason, and that his plain, laconic way of conversation carried with it a noble and becoming grace, that he did nothing unbecoming his birth, nor bent under fortune, and was evidently a more faithful counselor than those who made it their business to please and flatter. He was ashamed and repented that he had neglected so great a man, and suffered Antigonus to get so much power and reputation by ruining him. He now offered him many marks of respect and kindness, and gave him hopes that he would furnish him with ships and money to return to Greece, and would reinstate him in his kingdom. He granted him a yearly pension of 24 talents, a little part of which sum supplied his and his friends' thrifty temperance, and the rest was employed in doing good offices to, and in relieving the necessities of, the refugees that had fled from Greece, and retired into Egypt. But the elder Ptolemy, dying before Cleomenes' affairs, had received a full dispatch, and the successor, being a loose, voluptuous, and effeminate prince, well, he should stop drinking so much milk, right? Under the power of his pleasures and his women, his business was neglected. What's the name of that Northeast African tribe that they have like a contest of getting fat drinking milk? And, if you can drink a lot of milk and have the women do your task for you, that means you're, more wealthy or all that. But it doesn't make for a good ruler. It doesn't. For the king was so besotted with his women and his wine that the employments of his most busy and serious hours consisted at the utmost in celebrating religious feasts in his palace, carrying a timbrel, and taking part in the show, while the greatest affairs of state were managed by Agathoclea, the king's mistress, her mother, and the pimp, Oenanthes. At the first, indeed, they seemed to stand in need of Cleomenes, for Ptolemy, being afraid of his brother Magus, what was the pimp of the king's mistress? But in some culture, like in Arabic, you say pimping. They're usually going to use the word for a guy who lets his female family members go out immodest or do immorality, if tolerant of it. It's one or approving of it or whatever. It's, of course, it's one thing to say no and it's disobeyed or whatever. Anyways, but to just allow it, that's sort of we translate their word as pimping, which is kind of different. Prostituting them is just being approving of their immodesty and immoralities, a different matter, right? Well, we can lead to that. Who by his mother's means had a great interest among his soldiers, and gave Cleomenes a place in his secret councils, and acquainted him with the designs of taking off his brother. That doesn't. Though all were for it, declared his opinion to the contrary, saying, the king, if it were possible, should have more brothers, for the better security and stability of his affairs. And Ctesibius, the greatest favourite, replying that they were not secure of the mercenaries, whilst Magus was alive, Cleomenes returned that he need not trouble himself about that matter, for amongst the mercenaries there were about 3,000 Peloponnesians who were his fast friends, whom he could command at any time with a nod. This discourse made Cleomenes, for the present, to be looked upon as a man of great influence and assured fidelity, but afterwards Ptolemy's weakness increasing his fear, and he, as usually happens